She was the highest-paid woman on American television, the face that saved 3 separate shows from cancellation, and the name producers called when ratings were bleeding out and nothing else was working. Then came the mugshots, the arrests, the overdoses, and a daughter's public confession that explained everything the tabloids never could. Heather Locklear spent 30 years being one of the most watched women in America, and what happened to her was not a mystery. It was a slow, visible collapse that everyone saw coming and almost nobody understood until it was nearly too late. Heather Dean Locklear came into the world on September 25, 1961, in Los Angeles, California, and grew up in a middle-class suburb of the San Fernando Valley shaped by 2 very different forces pulling in opposite directions. Her father, Bill Locklear, was a former Marine who later worked at UCLA, a man who built his household around discipline, faith, and the expectation that you stood upright no matter what the world threw at you. Her mother, Diane Locklear, worked as a production executive at Disney, and she brought something entirely different into the home, a current of creativity and imagination that ran underneath everything. Growing up between those 2 poles gave Heather a foundation that was both rigid and artistically alive, and the combination planted something in her that would take years to fully surface. As a child, she was obedient and sharp, deeply attached to both parents, and already learning how to read a room before she had any reason to need that skill. At 6 years old, facing the prospect of corporal punishment, she talked her parents out of it so thoroughly that they abandoned the idea of physical discipline altogether. And that moment revealed something she would carry her entire life, a natural ability to captivate the people directly in front of her. The problem, as it turned out, was that this gift worked brilliantly on camera and completely failed her in private. High school stripped that confidence down to almost nothing. Locklear has spoken about it herself with a plainness that catches people off guard, given the image they associate with her name. She was cut from the cheerleading squad, plagued by acne, made self-conscious about her thin frame, and teased with the particular cruelty that teenagers specialize in. One relationship consumed years of her adolescence, cycling through breakups and reconciliations with a relentlessness that included falling apart on prom night itself. And yet something happened when she stepped onto a stage. The awkwardness that followed her through the hallways simply vanished, and a girl who felt entirely invisible in everyday life became magnetic the moment a light found her. Her teachers noticed it, her classmates noticed it, and even the ones who made her feel small could not deny what they were seeing. There was something in Heather Locklear that activated in front of an audience, and it was not manufactured or performed. It was simply there. UCLA came next, along with genuine academic ambitions. She had considered a career in psychology, imagining herself in research or academia, which is not the future most people would guess for someone who would go on to dominate American primetime for 2 decades. What changed everything was a small modeling job for the university's Bearwear fashion catalog, arranged through her father, who was then serving as head of admissions. At 5'5", any serious modeling career dissolved before it could take shape, but that job cracked open a different door entirely. At just 20 years old, Locklear walked through it and landed her first role on Dynasty, the primetime soap opera about a Denver oil dynasty that had millions of households completely under its spell every week. Producers wanted her look, her presence, her face. Her acting, by her own admission and by the accounts of everyone on set, was another matter. Those early Dynasty days were genuinely precarious, and what saved her was not talent alone, but a refusal to quit that she would call on repeatedly throughout her life. She was so nervous during filming that she struggled with basics, moving while delivering lines, holding a scene together without freezing. During one particularly visible incident, she locked up during a dramatic pause, and producer Elaine Rich responded with something between frustration and disbelief. A vocal coach was brought in to bring Locklear's high-pitched, uncontrolled voice down to something that could carry the emotional weight her character demanded. The humiliation of those early weeks could have ended her before she started. Instead, she worked. She learned. She showed up every single day and did the work until Sammy Jo Carrington stopped being a liability and became one of the most talked about characters on television. Locklear stayed with Dynasty from 1981 through 1989, and her presence helped push the show into the Nielsen Top 10, pulling tens of millions of American viewers to their screens every week. Running alongside Dynasty, she co-starred in T.J. Hooker with William Shatner, who called her his ultimate muse. And even there, the network's anxiety about her image produced moments that said more about Hollywood than about Locklear. Producers, convinced that audiences needed more of her physically than she was naturally providing, put padded bras on the costume rack, then padded undergarments designed to create the impression of curves she did not have. Locklear wore the bra for a few weeks, and when she discovered the padded panties waiting in her dressing room, she refused outright. Years later on a talk show, she put it plainly. She was flat-chested and flat in the back, and she was never going to let anyone construct a fake version of her body for an audience. That refusal sounds like a small act, but underneath it was a woman drawing a line about who she was willing to become for someone else's comfort, and it was a line she would keep returning to throughout her career, even when the personal cost of holding it was enormous. Melrose Place changed everything at a scale that is genuinely difficult to describe to anyone who did not live through that era of American television. Locklear's role as Amanda Woodward was originally planned for 4 episodes. What she did with those 4 episodes sent the ratings climbing so sharply that producers scrambled to make her permanent. And by the time the dust settled, Melrose Place had climbed from 94th in the national ratings to 50th, drawing nearly 15 million viewers every single week. Amanda Woodward was sharp, commanding, and utterly without apology, a woman who walked into every room and immediately restructured its hierarchy. 4 consecutive Golden Globe nominations followed, and the press ran out of ordinary superlatives and started calling her the Queen of Prime Time. Critics who had once questioned her range were now writing that without Amanda Woodward, Melrose Place could never have become a global phenomenon. Covers of TV Guide and Rolling Stone, repeated appearances on People magazine's Most Beautiful Women list, 2 Saturday Night Live hosting slots that only genuine cultural icons received, and the 1991 People's Choice Award for Favorite Female Television Performer. Every one of those milestones pointed back to the same truth. The girl from the San Fernando Valley who could not make the cheerleading squad had become the defining female television star of her generation. Spin City arrived next, and what Locklear did there was arguably more impressive than anything she had done before, though far fewer people give her credit for it. The show was losing altitude when she joined as Caitlin Moore, a sharp and witty political aide whose arrival pulled audiences back and stabilized the entire series. Michael J. Fox said publicly that her presence gave the show a new vitality. Charlie Sheen, who stepped in when Fox's Parkinson's disease forced him to step back, called her the perfect co-star. None of that captured what she actually accomplished, which was serving as the emotional bridge that held viewers through one of the most delicate cast transitions in sitcom history, doing it so effectively that she earned 2 more consecutive Golden Globe nominations, this time for Best Actress in a Comedy or Musical Series. Boston Legal followed in 2007, a serious legal drama that required restraint and maturity her earlier work had never asked of her, and she delivered something most people did not expect, a performance stripped of the glamour and heat that had defined her for 20 years, replaced by something quieter and more controlled. It was not Melrose Place in terms of cultural impact, but it demonstrated something more interesting, that Heather Locklear could not be contained in a single definition of herself. Her personal life ran alongside all of this, like a separate story written by someone with a much darker sensibility. On Christmas Eve 1985, Mötley Crüe drummer Tommy Lee popped through the sunroof of a limousine, held a 2.3-carat diamond ring into the night air, and proposed. The wedding followed in May of 1986, and the honeymoon in the Cayman Islands ended with local authorities having to physically intervene in a violent confrontation between them. 7 years of marriage came after that. And what filled them, by multiple accounts, was alcohol, chaos, and a pattern of violence from Tommy that left marks on Locklear both visible and invisible. She pushed him toward AA, sat through couples counseling, underwent AIDS testing alongside him after a woman known to have shared needles with Tommy was diagnosed with the disease. The official divorce reason in 1993 was irreconcilable differences. The real reason was that she had held something together that could not be held together, and she had paid for it in ways that would echo forward for years. Ava Sambora entered her life in 1994, introduced through a mutual friend, and 7 months after they met, he proposed on Christmas Day with a pear-shaped Cartier diamond ring. She wore it to the Emmy Awards the very next day, while the press collectively lost its composure. The Paris wedding on December 17, 1994, was watched by all of Hollywood with something close to envy. Their daughter, Ava Sambora, arrived in 1997, and magazine covers filled with images of the three of them cemented the public image of a perfect family built from two entertainment worlds colliding. What was happening underneath that image, though, was a slow erosion. Richie spent most of his time on the road with Bon Jovi. Locklear's filming schedule consumed everything else. Two lives pulling in different directions for long enough will eventually stop sharing the same center, and by 2006, she filed for divorce in Los Angeles Superior Court. Richie was on tour when the news broke, and he told ABC News that everything at home was fine and that he was still planning Valentine's Day with Heather. She had not told him it was coming. What came after the divorce delivered the wound that her daughter Ava would later identify as the true source of everything that followed. Richie Sambora began a relationship with Denise Richards, not a stranger, not someone from a different world. Denise Richards, who had been Locklear's closest friend, someone she had trusted completely, someone close enough to the family that the betrayal did not read as a romantic complication, but as a fundamental collapse of the two most important relationships in her life happening simultaneously and publicly. Every tabloid ran the story. Every entertainment broadcast covered it. The image of the perfect family dissolved overnight, replaced by headlines about betrayal and broken trust, and Locklear was left to absorb both losses at once, her husband and her best friend, to each other in front of everyone. Ava Sambora, speaking years later with the clarity that comes from watching someone you love suffer for a long time, said directly that this double betrayal was the wound that would not close. The trigger that pushed her mother into anxiety, depression, and isolation so severe that prescription drugs became the only available escape. The years after 2006 settled into a cycle that became grimly familiar. In February 2018, police responded to Locklear's Westlake Village home after a violent confrontation with her boyfriend. She attacked him, then turned on 3 responding officers, and during questioning, allegedly threatened to shoot police if they came back. Months later, in June of 2018, another arrest for assaulting a police officer and a paramedic called during a separate incident, followed by hospitalization for a suspected overdose. In the week before that arrest, firefighters had rushed to her home after reports she had become suicidal and violent. 8 criminal charges accumulated: 5 counts of battery on an officer, 1 count of battery on emergency personnel, 2 counts of obstructing law enforcement. Prison was avoided through mandatory treatment, 30 days in a mental health facility, a suspended 120-day jail sentence contingent on completing the program, 3 years of probation, a ban on alcohol, and a prohibition on owning firearms. The mugshots traveled around the world, and the woman who had won the People's Choice Award for Favorite Female Television Performer was now the centerpiece of criminal reports and cautionary headlines. Through every stage of the collapse, Ava Sambora never left. Not during the arrests, not during the hospitalizations, not during the periods when stepping back would have been entirely reasonable self-protection. She held her mother's hand through treatment, spoke publicly about her love and faith in Locklear at moments when Locklear could not locate faith in herself, and said simply that her mother had always been there for her, comforting and guiding her, and that she wanted to give that back. That kind of loyalty does not come from obligation. It comes from a bond that survived things most relationships would not, and it may be the single most important reason Heather Locklear is still here. Chris Heiser came back into her life in 2017, her high school boyfriend, returning during one of the lowest stretches of her adult years. He became, by her own description, the most easygoing and loving presence she had known. In April of 2020, during her 1-year sobriety anniversary, they became engaged, and the timing said something that no press release could have communicated more directly. Her family, her parents, her siblings, and Ava were all present and genuinely happy for her. Locklear said in one interview that he would be her husband for life, whether they formally married or not, and that what mattered was being together, loving each other, supporting each other through whatever came next. For a woman who had spent decades performing happiness for cameras and audiences and magazine covers, those quiet words carried more weight than anything Dynasty or Melrose Place ever gave her. By 2025, Heather Locklear had returned to public life on her own terms and at her own pace. A podcast appearance with old friends showed her looking relaxed and genuinely happy. A talk at the Calgary Expo in Canada gave audiences a chance to hear her reflect on her television career with honesty and warmth. An emotional reunion with Michael J. Fox at the Toronto Fan Expo, nearly 25 years after Spin City, reminded everyone watching that these were real relationships, not just professional history. At a Melrose Place panel, she spoke openly about the reboot rumors that kept circulating, and producer Charles Pratt confirmed publicly that her salary had once been the central obstacle to the show's continuation, which functioned, in its own way, as the clearest possible tribute to how singular she had been. In May of 2025, news confirmed that her engagement to Chris Heiser had ended after roughly 5 years, but sources who spoke about her noted she was in a good place, which, from someone who had spent years in genuinely dangerous places, meant something real and earned. Heather Locklear holds no Oscar and no Emmy, and her career legacy does not rest on the kind of awards that get displayed in glass cases. What she built over more than 2 decades of American television was something different and in many ways harder to achieve. A connection with audiences so consistent and so genuine that producers across 3 separate decades called her name when they needed someone who could save a show that was dying. She shaped an entire archetype of television character, the powerful, contradictory, magnetic woman who owns every room she enters, and she did it on Dynasty, T.J. Hooker, Melrose Place, Spin City, and Boston Legal across 4 decades of a medium that discards most of its stars within a single season. The personal cost of that career, the marriages, the betrayals, the addiction, the arrests, was real and devastating and documented in full public view. None of it erased what she built, and none of it is the final word on who she is. The final word belongs to the woman walking through a quiet California neighborhood in casual clothes, a daughter who chose to stay by her side, and a sobriety she fought for and earned. That is what 30 years of American television's reigning queen looks like from the other side.